And so now that we're able to kind of at least recognize some warning signs of burnout, it also helps to figure out where this might be coming from or what might be causing burnout. And there are different factors when it comes to this. And the first group of factors we would like to talk about is work related causes. And so, as we said a while ago, burnout doesn't just happen in a snap. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens, first of all, it's an occupational phenomenon, which means that the work environment that we find ourselves in plays a huge role in the potential development of burnout. And so some of the work related causes may involve a lack of control over work. This doesn't just mean that, oh, I don't feel like I can do my work, or I might not be able to accomplish it, or I'm not good enough. But also that feeling wherein, I'm not sure if this is an experience that any of you might have felt, but a lack of control can also manifest itself in sometimes feeling micromanaged, wherein you don't necessarily have that autonomy over your own work. Okay. On top of that, it could also come in the form of not feeling like your ideas are being listened to. Because in that case, again, you don't have control over your work because instead you're just being tasked with things and not given the opportunity to answer problems with your own solutions. So this lack of control is more than just feeling like I can't do it, but also that feeling of agency and autonomy being taken away from you in the workplace. On top of that, a lack of recognition or reward for good work is also another potential cause. A very big risk factor is unclear job expectations. The reason that this can be huge is because when job expectations are unclear, then as an employee, people are forced to be uncertain about what is expected of them or what they have to do. And when people don't know what they have to do per se, it might feel as if they're always having to catch up or always having to get things done. And normally unclear job expectations actually lead to overly demanding job expectations too. Because when there's a fuzzy or unclear job description, then this becomes an opportunity for different demands that may not be included or clear in the job description to be given, and thus creating overwork, sometimes monotonous or unchallenging work. And working in a chaotic or high pressure environment can also lead to this. But as much as burnout is a function of occupation, it's not the only risk factor. Another thing that we can look at are the lifestyles of individuals. One of which could be working too much, not making time for self-care, socialization, or leisure. And so what ends up happening is that for an individual, even if that person isn't necessarily being demanded to work, there may be an internal need to keep on working. On top of that, a lack of close supportive relationships could also be a risk factor. I mean, research shows that, as social beings, humans do thrive when they're able to socialize. This isn't even a question of introversion or extroversion. It's more of that feeling of belongingness and feeling supported by people, having a safe space where you can grow and be yourself. But the absence of close and supportive relationships takes away that social net that can be helpful in building that resilience that comes when you may have to face difficulties in life. Another thing could be taking too many responsibilities and a lack of sleep as well. And then we also have traits and attitudes. When we talk about traits and attitudes, this normally refers to, I guess, personal characteristics and thought patterns. One, we could have the perfectionist. Again, let's think of this as not necessarily let's assume that there are no overwork demands, but this is more of like a trait and attitude kind of situation. And so a perfectionist would be the type of person who always needs their work to be 120%. And so this is a risk factor for burnout because this can lead to overworking, not stopping until something is perfect. And when people are have these perfectionistic tendencies, then they tend to, one, be harsher on themselves when they're not able to sometimes reach these unrealistic standards that they may have for themselves. And two, leads to a pattern of overworking, doing as much as a person can in order to reach that 120%. Then we also have the pessimist, who tends to have a negative thinking pattern or see things in a negative light. And so this person or this kind of thinking pattern is at risk for burnout because we talked about it a while ago. One of the emotional signs of burnout is that feeling of helplessness and self-doubt. And this can arise from being pessimistic as well. If a person tends to always see the worst potential outcome, then of course it would be automatic also for that person to expect failure, to expect to be stuck. And so these kinds of thought patterns can result in burnout too. We also have the type A, who always wants things to be done their way. And when that happens, it becomes difficult to let go. And when we always have to take control of situations that honestly we may not necessarily have control over, then that could lead to stress related to work, which again can result in burnout. The workaholic, very similar to the perfectionist, but might not necessarily have those standards, but instead enjoy or use work as a means of sometimes escaping other things in their lives that might be important. And lastly, the people pleaser. As a people pleaser, if you notice, it may be very different from the other 4 traits and attitudes that we've talked about. But when one has these people-pleasing tendencies, this could result in that person becoming a yes person, always saying yes to work, always trying to please the workmates, always trying to please the higher ups. And so what ends up happening here is, fine, maybe this person is liked, but what ends up happening is so much work is dumped on that person's plate. And if that person wants to continue pleasing, they're gonna have to continue working. And as we've noticed, this prolonged state of stress and pressure, again, really places people at a higher risk for experiencing burnout. Excuse me, just gonna drink water. And so I'm not gonna necessarily go through the phases of burnout like in detail, but this could be a good guide to see how burnout develops. When we start in a new occupation or we're given a new role, what can happen is we find ourselves in a honeymoon phase. Hey, this is a new job, I'm excited, let's see what I can do, let's see what this role has in store for me. And so it becomes easier to become productive. As with anything though, whether even if it's an enjoyable experience, the truth is, repeatedly doing the same thing, putting in a lot of your time, effort, and energy into this activity or into this occupation does lead to stress, right? It leads to tiredness. And when this settles in, focus can become difficult. In an ideal world, when we recognize that we may be, experiencing stress, then this is when we can maybe start to engage in different coping mechanisms, stress regulation, emotional regulation, so that we don't find ourselves falling later into this. But then again, the truth is, as an individual, you can only do so much. If a work environment is indeed extremely stressful, no matter how much you're able to cope, the stress will always be present, and this will keep on getting activated. And so, assuming that you're not able to cope with the stress, and assuming that the work environment is high pressure, doesn't relent, and continues this whole, doesn't necessarily address these issues, what can end up happening is this chronic stress phase, where the stress becomes consistent. It starts to affect work, productivity, output, and motivation. And then this is when we can get burnt out. Melting point is reached. We're unable to function on a personal and professional level. And the physical, emotional behaviors signs that we talked about a while ago start to become more frequent and start to become more intense. And if we're unable to recover from the initial burnout phase, then the truth is our body can get used to it, and this can become habitual.